Everyone, this is my father, Arthur. Please excuse him. He's a bit of a family embarrassment, but he insisted on coming. She said it laughing, the way you'd say something you'd rehearsed enough times that it no longer felt cruel to you, even though it clearly was. The colleague she'd said it to smiled politely, shook my hand, and turned back to the conversation. What my daughter didn't know, standing in that ballroom under $300,000 worth of chandelier lighting, was that every single person in that room, the colleague she'd just apologized to for my presence, the CEO working the room 2 tables over, the caterers, the event planners, even the foundation whose name was printed on the Gala programs, answered directly or indirectly to me. She was about to find that out in front of all of them. My name is Arthur. I'm 69 years old, and for the better part of 4 decades, I've made a career out of being the person nobody in a room notices. I don't look like money. I never have, on purpose. I favor plain wool sweaters over blazers. I've worn the same style of brown leather shoes since 1994 because I found a cobbler who could keep resoling the same 3 pairs indefinitely. And I drive a used Volvo wagon that I bought, used the second time, from the same dealer who sold it to me new. If you sat next to me on a train, you would guess retired schoolteacher before you guess anything else. And for most of my life, that guess has suited me perfectly. I started my career as an actuary, of all things, a profession built entirely around reading risk quietly and correctly, long before anyone else in the room understands what's actually happening. In my 30s, I began taking small, careful equity positions in boutique companies I believed were undervalued, using savings I built slowly and without any flash. My first real success was a mid-sized regional accounting firm nobody wanted to touch after a messy partner dispute in the late 1980s. I bought in quietly, restructured the leadership from behind the scenes, and sold my position a decade later for 11 times what I'd paid. I remember my late wife, Miriam, asking me once why I never told anyone at church or at the neighborhood barbecues what that sale had actually meant for us. I told her the truth. I didn't want a single relationship in my life to shift, even slightly, once people did the math on what I was worth. She understood that better than almost anyone, because she'd watched her own father's friendships curdle after a modest lottery win decades earlier, and she never once pushed me to live any differently. I never stopped. Over the following 3 decades, through a private holding company called Meridian Crest, a name that appears on almost nothing public-facing deliberately, I built controlling or majority stakes in 14 companies across accounting, logistics, and, most relevantly to tonight's story, a boutique public relations and events firm called Ashford & Vail. I bought into Ashford & Vail 22 years ago when it was 3 people working out of a converted loft, barely surviving on wedding contracts and small nonprofit galas. I saw something in the founder, a sharp, exhausted young woman who clearly understood the event's business better than her bank account suggested. I put in the capital that let her hire her first real team, took a majority stake as part of the arrangement, and then did what I always do. I stayed almost entirely out of sight. I sit on the board under the name Kessler Holdings, one of 6 entities listed in Meridian Crest structure, and in 22 years, I have attended exactly 1 Ashford & Vail event in person at the very beginning before most of the current staff had ever been hired. Today, Ashford & Vail is one of the most sought-after event and public relations firms in the city, running galas and campaigns for some of the largest foundations and corporations in the region. Almost nobody who works there, including, until recently, my own daughter, has any idea that the quiet man on the Kessler Holdings line of their cap table is the same Arthur who taught them to ride a bike 30 years ago. Because that's the complication I haven't told you yet. My daughter, Sophia, is a senior associate at Ashford & Vail. She's worked there for 6 years. She got the job entirely on her own. I want to be completely clear about that because it matters enormously to how this story unfolds. She never used my name. She never even knew there was a name to use. She applied cold, interviewed brilliantly, and earned every promotion since on merit I've watched from a careful, invisible distance, prouder of her than I've ever let her know. I never told her the truth about Meridian Crest, or about my stake in her own company, for the same reason I've kept quiet about most of my life's work. I wanted her to build her career believing she'd built it entirely herself, without ever wondering whether a door had opened for reasons that had nothing to do with her talent. I didn't anticipate what that silence would eventually cost me. Sophia and I were close once, in the ordinary, uncomplicated way fathers and daughters are close when she's young enough to think everything you say is interesting. That changed, gradually, somewhere in her mid-20s, once she started building a career and a social circle built around a version of success that had very little room in it for a father who dressed like a retired schoolteacher and drove a twice-owned Volvo. I don't think Sophia set out to become embarrassed by me. I think, like most drift, it happened one small accommodation at a time. In her first year at Ashford and Vale, she'd still bring me to the occasional office holiday party, introduce me warmly, let me ask her coworkers about their work. By year 3, the introductions had gotten shorter, more clipped. "This is my dad. He's retired." With a faint apologetic note in her voice I told myself I was imagining. By year 5, I noticed she'd stopped inviting me to anything work-related at all. And when I asked gently why, she said the events were boring, corporate stuff. You wouldn't enjoy it, which might even have been half true, except that I noticed she brought her boyfriend, and later her fiancé, to nearly every one of those boring events without hesitation. There's one dinner in particular I still think about. Sophia had just made senior associate, and we were celebrating at a restaurant she'd chosen. Nice, but not extravagant, the kind of place I would have picked myself. Her fiancé, Marcus, asked me, kindly enough, what I'd done for a career before retiring. Before I could answer, Sophia jumped in. "Dad did actuarial work, insurance stuff, very number crunchy," she said, with a small laugh that made the whole subject sound faintly embarrassing, like admitting a relative had worked in a field nobody wanted described in more detail. I let it go, the way I'd let 100 small comments go before it, because correcting the record would have meant explaining Meridian Crest, and explaining Meridian Crest would have meant unraveling 22 years of the one gift I genuinely wanted to give her, a career she never had to wonder about. If you've ever watched someone you love slowly edit you down into a smaller, tidier, less interesting version of yourself, because the real version didn't fit the story they wanted to tell about their own success, you understand exactly how that dinner felt. I told myself, driving home that night, that it didn't matter. I told myself the same thing a great many times over the following 2 years. There was a second moment, smaller but somehow sharper, that I've never told anyone about until now. Sophia's engagement party, a year later, was held at a rooftop venue Ashford in Vale had booked at a steep discount through an industry connection. When Marcus's business partner asked, politely, whether I'd be attending Sophia's work events more now that I was retired and had more free time, Sophia answered for me before I could open my mouth. "Oh, Dad's not really a networking kind of person. He prefers staying home." It wasn't unkind, exactly. It was worse than unkind. It was a small, tidy decision made entirely on my behalf about a version of my life she'd never actually asked me about. It mattered more than I let myself admit. And it came to a head on the night of Ashford and Vale's 20th anniversary gala, the single largest event the firm had ever thrown, celebrating exactly 2 decades since I'd first written that quiet check that saved it. Sophia hadn't planned to invite me at all. I found out about the event, ironically, through my own board materials. Meridian Crest, as majority stakeholder, received a formal invitation to the 20th anniversary celebration weeks before Sophia ever mentioned it existed. When she finally did bring it up, almost as an afterthought over a phone call, it was clear the invitation came with conditions. It's a big deal for the firm, Dad. A lot of important people will be there. Clients, board members, some very senior people. You can come if you want, but please just keep it low-key. Don't ask people a million questions about their jobs. Don't bring up the actuary thing. Just, blend in. I told her I understood. I did understand in a way that I don't think she realized. I understood exactly what kind of night it was about to become, better than she did, because I was the one who'd read the guest list attached to the board invitation 2 weeks earlier and recognized nearly every name on it. I arrived in the same navy wool sweater I'd have worn to a Tuesday afternoon, layered under a simple gray blazer because it was the closest thing I owned to formal, and because some part of me, honestly, wanted to see what would happen if I showed up exactly as myself. The ballroom was extraordinary. The kind of room Sophia had spent 2 decades helping other firms fill, finally filled for her own. Chandeliers, a jazz quartet, a step-and-repeat wall with the Ashford and Vale logo in gold lettering I recognized from 100 board decks I'd approved over the years. Sophia found me near the entrance, visibly tense, and steered me toward a small cluster of colleagues before I'd even had a chance to get a drink. "Everyone, this is my father, Arthur," she said, already smiling apologetically before she'd finished the sentence. "Please excuse him. He's a bit of a family embarrassment, but he insisted on coming." She meant it, mostly as a joke, the kind of self-deprecating line people use to lower expectations before an awkward moment has a chance to happen. But I watched her colleague's polite smile, watched Sophia's shoulders relax with relief once the introduction was over and the risk of me had been safely managed and dismissed, and I understood, with total clarity, that this wasn't a joke born in that moment. It was a script she'd rehearsed, probably more than once, for exactly this kind of evening. I shook the colleague's hand. I said something pleasant and forgettable, and then Sophia excused herself to check on the seating chart, leaving me standing near the edge of the room the way you'd leave a coat you weren't sure matched the outfit. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter and heavier. The specific grief of realizing that your own child has decided, carefully and repeatedly, that the truest version of you isn't good enough to be seen. I found a quiet spot near the bar and ordered a soda water, and I waited, because I knew, better than anyone else in that ballroom, exactly how the rest of the evening was about to unfold. About 40 minutes later, the firm's CEO, a sharp, warm woman named Renata Ashford, the original founder Sophia, had never met the earliest version of the frightened, brilliant young woman I'd bet on in a converted loft 22 years earlier, began making her way through the room greeting board members and major clients personally, the way any good CEO does at an anniversary gala. I watched her scan the crowd, and I watched her spot me near the bar. Her whole posture changed. "Arthur," she said, crossing the room quickly, both hands extended to take mine, her voice carrying farther than either of us probably intended in a room that had quieted slightly for the CEO's arrival. "I can't believe you're actually here. 22 years, and this is only the second time. I have to introduce you properly. This is completely overdue." Sophia, who had just returned from the seating chart, stopped mid-step about 10 feet away. Renata didn't wait for permission. She turned, still holding one of my hands warmly in both of hers, and addressed the small crowd that had begun to gather, the way people gather instinctively when they sense something is about to be explained. "Everyone, I want you to meet Arthur Kessler. Well, Arthur Voss, but most of our records know him as A. Kessler Holdings. 22 years ago, this man wrote the check that kept Ashford and Vale from closing in its second year. He's held a majority stake and a board seat this entire time, and he has been, without exaggeration, the single most patient investor I have ever worked with in a business built almost entirely on people who want their return yesterday." I watched the small crowd's expression shift, polite interest sharpening into genuine surprise, a few executives I recognized from board materials realizing, in real time, exactly who they were shaking hands with. And I watched my daughter's face do something I will remember for the rest of my life. Confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, sinking recalculation, the exact sequence of a person rebuilding an entire private story about someone in real time, watching every beam of it collapse. "Dad," she said quietly, You own Ashford in Vale." "I hold a majority stake," I said, gently, because I didn't want the correction to feel like an attack. "I've been on the board since the beginning. Renata and I have known each other longer than you've been alive, Sophia." Renata, sensing the moment had shifted into something more personal than she'd intended to walk into, excused herself graciously, leaving my daughter and me standing near the bar in a room full of people who, 10 minutes earlier, she'd asked me to blend into. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, and I heard something underneath the question that wasn't quite anger, something closer to the specific vertigo of realizing the ground you've been standing on was never quite what you thought it was. "Because I wanted you to build this career believing it was entirely yours," I said. "And it is entirely yours, Sophia. Every promotion, every project. I've never once used my seat on that board to influence anything about your position here. I made sure of that deliberately for 6 years." I paused, because the next part was harder to say than the first. "But I also let you believe for 6 years that I was a man not interesting enough to bring to your work events. I'll let you rehearse an apology for me. I think I owe you the truth tonight. But I think you owe yourself an honest look at why family embarrassment was the easiest joke you had ready." Sophia and I didn't resolve everything that night, standing near a bar at our own company's biggest event of the decade. Some conversations are too large for a ballroom, no matter how good the acoustics are. She excused herself for the rest of the evening, professional and composed on the surface, and we didn't speak again until the following weekend, when she came to my house, uninvited but not unwelcome, and sat at my kitchen table for almost 3 hours. She told me something that surprised me, honestly, more than the gala itself had. She said that some part of her had always sensed there was more to my life than actuarial work and a quiet retirement, and that instead of asking, she'd built a simpler story. Modest father, unremarkable career, nothing worth explaining to important people, because that story was easier than reckoning with the possibility that she genuinely didn't know her own father. "It was never really about you being boring, Dad," she said. "It was about me being scared of finding out I'd never actually bothered to look." I didn't lecture her further. I think she'd already done that work herself, more thoroughly than I could have done it for her. What I did instead was invite her, properly this time, into the part of my life I'd kept from her for 22 years, not as a gesture of wealth, but as an offer of honesty. She's been to 2 Meridian Crest board meetings since, sitting quietly in the back, watching how her father actually spent his Tuesdays. She hasn't taken a position in the company, and I haven't offered her one, because we both agreed, without much discussion, that her career at Ashford and Vale means more to her precisely because it was never mine to give. Renata, for her part, has taken to introducing me at every event since, whether I attend or not, as the reason this firm exists, a habit I've stopped trying to talk her out of, mostly because I've noticed Sophia standing a little straighter every time she hears it. As for the navy sweater and the twice-owned Volvo, they're still exactly what I wear, exactly what I drive. Some things were never about hiding from my daughter. They were about hoping, for 22 years, that she'd love the man in the sweater before she ever needed a reason attached to a balance sheet. There's one last exchange from that weekend at my kitchen table that I keep coming back to. Near the end of our 3 hours together, Sophia asked whether I was disappointed in her. Not angry, she was careful to specify, but disappointed in the quieter, more permanent sense. I told her the truth. I wasn't disappointed in who she'd become. I was disappointed that it took a chandelier and a CEO's handshake to force a conversation we both should have had years ago, over something as ordinary as a Sunday dinner. She didn't have a response to that right away, and I didn't need one. Some silences, once you finally name them honestly, don't require filling. Here's what 4 decades of staying quietly out of sight has taught me. The people who need a title or a number before they can respect you are never really seeing you in the first place. And sometimes, the people who love you most have simply never been given a reason to look closer. Not because they don't care, but because you've spent years making it easy for them not to. Silence, even generous silence, has a cost. I paid mine at a gala under $300,000 worth of chandelier lighting, and I'd pay it again, because the conversation it finally forced was worth every uncomfortable second. A quiet life is a gift you can give the people you love. It should never come at the cost of them actually knowing who you are. If you've ever watched someone you love build a smaller story about you than the truth deserved, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe because there are a lot more quiet fathers and a lot more overdue reckonings still to come. I'll see you in the next one.